Good morning. Sorry, I don't think I introduced myself, but my name is Yumiko, one of the pastors at Wellspring. And as Pastor Cheryl just mentioned in an announcement, we are in a new sermon series. And in this series, we take our time reflecting on the resurrection of Jesus in the coming year. Oh, sorry, coming weeks. No, we're not going to spend a whole year, which is what I'm excited about. Because, I think I mentioned this at this church one time that I didn't grow up as a Christian in Japan. And then I became a Christian kind of sort of out of politeness to this pastor. And I think I told you the story. I think some people are nodding yes, some people are not. Okay, if you haven't heard it, we'll talk later, but that's not important. But the important part is I didn't grow up as a Christian, and I grew up in Japan. So this whole story of Jesus' resurrection and celebrating Easter, that's not really a part of our culture in Japan, so we don't do it. So I knew very little about Easter's story. I knew very little about Jesus' resurrection. And even after I became a Christian, I was kind of unclear about what exactly happened and what does it have to do with me. That was all mystery. When I was exploring Christianity, believing that Jesus actually was resurrected and that somehow have something to do with me, that part was a big hurdle for me. So after I became a Christian, I figure I should learn a little bit more since people tell me it's the foundation of our faith. So I feel like I should have a clearer picture. And I thought the Bible would be a really good place to start. So I read the Bible, I read the Gospels, and I read a book of Matthew, like today's passage come from. You read in the Gospel, you get through Jesus' life, Jesus was born, great, and Jesus grew up and do all sorts of wonderful things. He goes to eat Last Supper, and then there's a crucifixion. It's like, oh, that's painful. I can see that has something to do with me. And next part is the part like today's passage, which I'm going to read now. You have, I think if you're here, you have the handouts. If not, you can just look up Matthew 28, 1 to 10. And I'm going to read the New International Version, but you can read whatever the version that's familiar to you. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like a dead man. The angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He's risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has risen from the dead and it is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the woman hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." I read this passage or passage like this, and my first thought was, wait, that's it? Is that it? And I went back and I went ahead and I was like, wait, yeah, this is it. This is it about resurrection. Because I don't know, but to me at the time anyway, it seemed to me that the what was written in the Bible is before the resurrection and after the resurrection, but not the actual resurrection scene, right? I expected some account of the how and when exactly Jesus was raised from the dead, as I was told at church. But I didn't find it in a passage like today's passage. One moment, right, the passage before this in chapter 27, Jesus was dead. And then next thing, you flip the page and you read through it and Jesus was alive. This is great. But then, okay, then what happened in between? So I was a bit confused, right? Because I was told, again, this is the foundation of our faith. For something that important, first of all, it's only 10 verses. It's kind of short, right? It's important. You only spend 10 verses. And I felt like over and over I read, I felt like it felt like something was missing from the whole story here. Okay, I don't know if you all felt that way. Maybe it's just me because you guys all look like, oh no, it was a surprise. So I guess it was just me. Maybe you grew up in a church and this is a familiar story. Maybe you have all this other information from other, part the learning you did. And it's also very possible that I'm missing something very obvious. After all, I'm kind of the person who's been driving in Hawaii a couple of years, not ever seen the sign, the speed sign on a highway. So there's a chance that I'm missing something very obvious here. But while I might be the only one who feels like something was missing, that I just feel like, wait, that's it about this story. In this room, there are actually other people, at least in 2,000 years ago, around that time, who felt somewhat like I felt. Right? They somewhat felt like this passage was a bit insufficient. Some people found this whole story to be too unlikely or not credible. I mean, as a starter, right? When you read this passage, the series of events recorded in this passage is a bit odd. Okay, first big earthquake. Earthquake does happen, so okay, that's okay. The open and empty tomb, that doesn't happen that often, but happens sometimes. People steal bodies and all the stuff that's buried with. But then there's the angel in the picture, which also, okay, happens in Old Testament, so maybe that happens. But then not only that, not only the earthquake, the open and empty tomb, and the angel, there is Jesus appearing to the woman, all add up to this an unlikely story that we see in this passage. Not only that, who was saying this was all happening? Who told us this whole event happened? It's the women, right? The women claim that this heavy tombstone was removed. The woman claimed that this angel was sitting on the tombstone. Then they claim this angel spoke to them. And then they also told they saw Jesus. Yeah, okay. That's how it felt to the people back then. See, it would have been very, very hard for the people back then to believe the whole story told by the women. As both Pastor Rebecca and Pastor Gerald a couple weeks ago have in the past couple weeks mentioned that the women in the back then, for various reasons, just people didn't assume the woman knew what they're talking about or what they're doing even. And that's why both in Roman and Jewish laws, both laws says women are not credible witnesses in a court and really anywhere else. But let's suppose there was this nice, decent person who valued women's voice more than the convention of the time, who actually dared to believe all this series of events could happen in one day. Very open-minded, very unlike person was there. And this person heard this story and I sat down with a woman and on the edge asking, okay, so I heard you saw all these things. That's fascinating. Tell me everything. So you saw Jesus. You saw Jesus and the tomb was empty. So how did Jesus actually come back to life? I mean, was Jesus just got up and walked out and Jesus moved the stone? How did that happen? Jesus just go through the tomb and then he moved the house? Or was it more like a light and a loud noise and Jesus was just fat? How did it happen? Tell me everything, woman. You saw it. You were the only one who were there. And those women wouldn't be able to say anything to that, wouldn't be able to answer any of that, right? Because they wouldn't know. And I found it a bit let down especially when I was looking for proof and the details of Jesus' resurrection. I wish that a Bible was more explicit, more descriptive, more convincing, and more informative about Jesus' resurrection, actual resurrection scenes, so that I could be sure. And again, it wasn't just me who found this story was lacking some details. And that's why, this was, and then that this story felt like a lot of people. This is an unlikely story vouched by non-credible witnesses, and it was missing the actual resurrection details. Bunch of people felt that way, and they all kind of had speculations about what happened. I mean, one obvious one is, did it really happen? Did Jesus really, did we hear like Jesus resurrected? Did it really happen? And various theories about what happened to the Jesus body and what that meant. Some people speculated that Jesus' body was actually stolen, and all this reappearing of Jesus was just made up by Christians, right? Just to refute that there's a resurrection. And there was also, and actually are, theories about Jesus actually wasn't really dead and somehow moved this big stone by himself and escaped to the other parts of the world like India, France, England, and even to Japan. In Japan and remote area, there is a tomb of Jesus because some people speculated Jesus got away. See, I think in my opinion, today's passage that we just read doesn't prove or explain about the resurrection of Jesus sufficiently. It doesn't do a good job of proving how or even whether the resurrection really happened. But there's one thing this Easter narrative does really, really well, which is to tell us the power of Jesus' resurrection. See, the Easter narrative, like the one we read today, may not prove or explain about resurrection, but it clearly shows us what happened in the morning was so powerful that it changed people's lives. For example, it transformed the women. They were the followers of Jesus of Nazareth. After this, they became the witnesses and the messengers of the resurrected Jesus Christ, the Messiah. These women came to the tomb to confirm that Jesus is really died, which was a custom back then because sometimes I guess people weren't. So it just goes to the tomb to confirm that they're really dead. And also they went to mourn for the loss. This dear friend, dear teacher, Jesus is gone. But instead of finding a dead body of Jesus, what they found was the empty tomb, which surprised them. And they were told, he isn't here. Oh, okay, where is he then? What does it mean? That doesn't mean he's alive? I'm sure they had a lot of questions. So instead of this mourning for the loss, what they ended up was just having all these questions and holding those questions, but also leave the tomb to go and tell the people what they saw. And they had no proof but their words. They lacked the credibility as witnesses. All they had, their only credential as witnesses, was the call from Jesus. The woman wasn't sent as a powerfully convincing, credible witnesses equipped with irrefutable evidence that would persuade everyone. But they went because Jesus chose them to be the witnesses and called them to be the messengers. You see, these women were not educated, not given a place in a society, and deprived of their voices. These women were transformed into these unwavering messengers because the impact of the tomb was so strong. They could not be anything else, anybody else, but the messengers of Jesus' resurrection. And that's the point of today's message and passage. So it doesn't prove or explain Jesus' resurrection. It doesn't give us the details, but tells us that what happened in one morning 2,000 years ago changed these women ultimately and definitively. And the book of Acts and the rest of the New Testament is filled with many more examples of people like them. Male disciples later became the messengers like the woman, fulfilling their calls even at their cost, even at the cost of their lives. And in the 2,000 years of Christian history, there are countless people whose lives been changed because of Jesus' resurrection. And all of the lives, those transformed lives, are the unshakable proof that a Jesus is risen from the dead. And all began at the empty tomb. The empty tomb is not a proof of the resurrection, but it's a pointer to the power of the resurrection. Have we all experienced this transformative power of resurrection? Have our lives been changed by the risen Christ? For some of us, the answer is definitely yes. And for some of us, the answer is definitely no. And for many of us, I think some of us sit in the middle. Yes, I think I have been transformed by the power of resurrection, but I'm not sure. I don't think Jesus resurrected, Jesus touched my life. I'm not sure. And sometimes also, I think people's answer may change time to time. Sometimes you're so sure, yes, you changed my life. No. For me, the answer is yes. Definitely, I experienced the transformative power of Jesus, and that changed my life. But not always, right? There are times that I wondered if that was all made up in my mind, whether Jesus really resurrected and his resurrection have anything to do with my life. Looking at what's going on in the world, sometimes my life and people's life, sometimes I wonder, right? Sometimes I wonder if God really loves the world, if God really cares. If the resurrection was so significant and so powerful, why is the world is how it is still today? And one of these moments came to me about 20 years ago. I was in a town called Poipet. I was spending that summer in Cambodia doing some research on child trafficking. And as a part of the research, I spent this few days at the town of Poipet, which is a border town, Cambodian border town with Thailand. And which just happened to be the town where Cambodian trafficked kids gets dropped off after being deported by Thai authorities. So what happens is Cambodian kids get trafficked into Thailand, and then the Thai authorities do a good job of finding them and protecting them and bring them back as far as Poipet, town of Poipet, and drop them off, and then put them in the hands of Cambodian authorities. And so I went to kind of observe the whole process. Town also had casinos, bars, and brothels. It just was very, I don't know what the right word is. It's not the best place to, I guess, bring your kids for your vacation. But so in that town, in addition to observing those, I also did some interviews with the people who work at a nonprofit, protecting those trafficked children or rescuing them. I also did some interviews with the people who work at the brothels, trying to interview some people who are the customers of the brothels as well. So that's what you did. I did all day, kind of running around the town, spending a very long day, and then okay, let's call it a day. And I started walking back to the hotel, and I noticed this couple kind of ahead of me, kind of where maybe the end of the room is. It's a bit of distance, but I noticed this couple because I recognized the woman. Woman, to be more exact, she was more like a girl. I actually met her earlier that day at one of the brothels. She was one of the person who worked there, did some interview with. So I brought like juice and snack and sat down with her, and I chatted with her, and I kind of learned about her and her day, along with her coworkers and everyone. And then, when I ask her, like, you ask her lots of questions, kind of innocent looking questions, like, oh, what's your birthday? Oh, okay. Oh, mine is June. And, oh, how old are you? Like, you kind of blend in the questions so that you can kind of get information in a seemingly innocent chat. And she said, oh, 21. And she didn't know many English words, but she knew that one. She's like, 21. And she was very clear. And I look at her thinking like, there's no way you're over 18. I thought you were 16. But that's one of the few words she knew. And she was actually one of the ones who spoke a little bit of English, a little bit of Japanese, in addition to her native language of Khmer. So that's why I spent more time with her. So that's why I recognized her when she was walking ahead of me. The man I didn't recognize, he was a stranger. He's late 20s. He's definitely a tourist. And from how he dressed, like kind of what he carries, and from his bad hairstyle, I just figure he's a Japanese national like myself. So I was like, oh, this is a Japanese guy. And, when you see in that town of Poipet, you see a local Cambodian girl who's working at a brothel, walking alongside of Japanese national, your radar goes up, right? You're like, what's going on? So just kind of follow. And they went into the hotel. And when they do, my suspicion confirmed. They weren't just taking an evening walk. He bought her. The hotel they walk in happened to be the hotel I was staying at, which is not surprised because this was a very popular hotel for Japanese tourists and it was filled with Japanese. So I just followed them. And as I still can picture this, as they walk up the stairs, I was also walking up the stairs. They go down the hallway. I was walking down the hallway and they turned a corner and I turned a corner. They went into their room and I just stood at the hallway. And even up to that point, in my mind, I'm thinking, what do? I got to do something. There's something wrong is happening in front of my eyes. I got to do something. I was thinking all these things I can do, all these things that I probably shouldn't share over here. It's all these things I wanted to do to him. I wanted to do it for her. But none of the things that I can think of that moment would ultimately save her. Maybe I could stop him doing what he was about to do with her that moment, but he would go back to another brothel or buy another one. And she'll have to go back to be with another customer, if not tomorrow, later that night. It just felt very overwhelmed. This just the evil, right? The evil that's happening in front of my eyes. And that's a part of the bigger evil that I just can't do anything about. Whatever I do will barely make a dent in this whole evil practice that's happening, not only in Poipet, all over Cambodia, all over Asia, all over the world. So I didn't know what to do, so I just went in my room and I just sat on my bed. I just remember it was a very clean, nice room, air conditioned, very comfortable after a long day of hot and humid day. I was just sitting on the bed. I was so mad. I was so mad. My body was shaking. I wanted to scream, but I was so mad I even couldn't scream. I was mad at that man. I was mad at all men. And I was mad at the world. And I was mad at myself, right? I wanted to do something I just couldn't do, I didn't do. But I was also mad at God. And I was so mad at God. I was like, God, what are you doing? And in a moment, I thought, okay, I should pray. So I got on my knee and I prayed and prayed and prayed. And God, okay, this is the time you do something miraculous. This is the time you intervene and save her. Come on, God, you do something. Or do you want me to do something? Tell me what to do. I'll do it. I'll do anything you tell me. Just tell me what to do. Nothing. I just prayed and prayed in silence and anger. And I was even more angry that I was mad that God didn't show up for her, but I was even more furious when I think of myself. God always shows up for me. Whenever I'm in trouble, whenever I'm in sad, when I'm in pain, he always shows up for me. Me and this girl. The Bible tells me that God made each and both of us wonderfully, fearfully. Bible says that God loves her as much as God loves me. But look at her. Is this what God's love looks like for her? You let this happen to your daughter every single day. All the while you bless another daughter every day. Shower her with the blessing, keep her safe, and provide her everything she needs. God, you look at her, you look at me, and how can you say that you love her? Like, are you really there? Like, are you really the love of God that we were told to believe? Right, that night, in my prayer and in my anger, I stared at this empty tomb long and hard, and I looked for God to come out, do something, and God did nothing. God wasn't there. A week later, I was still in Cambodia. I met another young Cambodian woman. She was a lawyer in her early 20s. She just recently had graduated from this top school in Cambodia. And she was polite, she was sweet. I sat down with her to do another interview, and this one about her work, but different type of work. She was one of the brave lawyers who was fighting against the owners of the brothels and bars and traffickers. But of course, even with her and her colleagues' dedication and courage, it was a hopeless battle to seek justice for traffic victims in this corrupted legal system in Cambodia at that time. But nothing stopped her from what she did. All her colleagues, experienced people drop out because it doesn't pay, it's dangerous, people constantly threaten you. But nothing stopped her doing what she did. It's lack of result, numerous constant death threats for her and her family. Even this overwhelming power of evil that she faced every day, nothing fazed her. As if she was untouched by this power of evil or the fear of her own life for her safety. With the calm, the smiles, she keeps showing up at the court. She keeps collecting the evidence. She keeps showing up the work. She continued to show up for the people like the girl in Poi Pet. She was gentle. She was humble. No chip on her shoulder. She was not like a very aggressive person or anything. But she was just like anybody else. Yet she was unbelievably brave and absolutely unstoppable. Just as Jesus would be. That day, when I sat down with her, I met Jesus. I experienced the power of resurrection in her. In the hotel room of Poi Pet, I thought God wasn't there. I was standing at the empty tomb, screaming at God to do something, and nothing. And when I didn't hear God's response, I questioned God's goodness, I questioned God's love, and even God's existence. But what I didn't know was that all along, the resurrected Jesus was alive and living and working among its people. Through the people like this brave lawyer, fighting for this girl and many, many others, undefeated by the power of death and by the power of the evil of the world. And in meeting that Jesus that day changed my life. It changed me to be the messenger, to tell the world that I saw Jesus in such an unexpected way. And Jesus is risen, and nothing, even the death or the evil of this world, would defeat the resurrected Jesus. What about you? Where are you today? Are you standing at the empty tomb, wondering where Jesus is? Or are you on the way running out to the world and tell the world that Jesus is risen? Or are you at the feet of Jesus worshiping because you met resurrected Jesus? For one reason or another, if you happen to be at the empty tomb and wondering where Jesus is, I pray this empty tomb that you're staring at will point you to a place of unexpected encounter with God. And as you do, I send you with this word of God from today's passage. So hear the word of God. The angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen just as he said." Congregation, Jesus Christ is risen.